I want to thank all of you for joining us today to discuss an important topic of privacy in the context of marketing for online advertising. The Commerce Committee has always had an interest in this subject, in protecting privacy and doing so in a way that is thoughtful and appropriate. And we need to take a closer look, I think, at Internet users' privacy as the field of online advertising develops. I understand, first of all, there are many, many benefits to online advertising. I understand that the free Internet and the open architecture of the Internet allows Internet service providers and Internet companies to provide services and products and information in a way that is almost breathtaking. And I understand the backbone of much of that is supported by advertising, by online Internet advertising. The questions that we discuss and raise today are not meant to suggest that advertising has no value as it relates to the Internet. Quite the contrary is the case. But I think there are issues that are developing that are important issues, and those are issues about the invisibility of data collection, the collection of information about online users, the security of the information that has been collected, and the use of that information. I'm concerned about the ability of users of the Internet to choose to allow others access to their data with an understanding of where it will be transferred and how it will be used. I'm concerned about users' ability to control this information. Most of the discussion about advertising on the Internet these days is about, not all of the discussion, but most of it is about behavioral advertising. The companies that have been gathering information about those who use the Internet are companies that wish to find ways to better target advertising. And I was actually this morning visiting with my college-age daughter about this subject, and she was asking about a hearing, and I said, well, think about going to a big shopping center and going to 4 stores, and you stop at the cosmetics section, you stop at the shoe section, you shop for a dress, and you go to CVS, and there's someone behind you with a notebook making notes about every place you're stopping and the products you're searching and looking at, and that becomes a part of a data bank they send to someone. Well, that's what happens in many cases now with respect to your use of the Internet. Someone is gathering information about where you traveled and what you viewed, and that goes into a data bank and can be sold or resold, and becomes the process by which companies will use the information in which to target advertising directly to you. And I think that the issue here of privacy, who's collecting what kind of information, how does that information exist, in what identifiable form, or how might that be used, who is it sold to, does the consumer know? All of those issues I think are very, very important, and the issues that surround them, I think, need to be discussed by the Congress in the context of trying to decide, are there protections, further protections necessary? Not only what protections now exist, but are further protections necessary? The companies believe that by gathering information about online users, they can serve more relevant advertisements to individuals and to increase the amount that they can charge per ad, and I understand all that, and revenue is important to the operation of diverse websites, but it's also important for us to ask the questions about protection for users' privacy and whether they should have a choice about whether they want to have data shared about what they are doing on the Internet. There's some discussion about self-regulation and the principles proposed by the Federal Trade Commission. I think some would suggest those are a good start. Some would suggest they are short of what is necessary. The FTC might need to go further and ensure the enforcement of any guidelines. Congress may need to address our patchwork of privacy laws, because all of this is a developing area. And when you're talking about the individual's right to privacy, it's very, very important. I do want to mention additionally that I had invited Internet service providers to testify today, and they had declined the invitation. So I'm going to do another hearing and invite, and that hearing will only be with Internet service providers, because I think they have to be a part of this discussion. I do appreciate all of those who have decided to come at our invitation and give us their perspective of these important issues. And we're going to begin today by hearing from Lydia Parnes, who's the director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission. Then we are going to, I've asked the panelists to be seated at the table, and we're going to hear from all of those on panel 2, and then we will ask questions. I say to Senator Vitter, I don't want to do opening statements. I'll be happy to recognize you for a moment, but what I want to do, we have a vote starting at 11:15. What I'd like to do, if that slips, we may be able to stay here till 11:45, but I want to get all the witnesses to testify and then have an opportunity for questions. All right. Ms. Parnes, you have testified before this committee before. We appreciate your being here again. And let me ask consent as I recognize you for the statement by Senator Inouye to be made a part of the permanent record. Ms. Parnes, you may proceed. And we have asked all of you to take 5 minutes for your oral testimony, and the permanent record will include your full statements.
Thank you, Chairman Dorgan, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Commission's work on issues related to online behavioral advertising. Balancing consumers' online privacy interests against the development of successful online business models has been a top priority for the Commission over the past decade. Behavioral advertising, the use of tracking data to target advertisements to online consumers, is a challenging issue. It may provide benefits to consumers in the form of advertising that is more relevant to their interests, as well as a reduction in unwanted ads. It may also help support a diverse range of free online content that consumers would otherwise have to pay for. For example, blogging, search engines, social networking, and instant access to newspapers from around the world. At the same time, many consumers express discomfort about the privacy and data security implications of being tracked. Without adequate safeguards in place, consumer tracking data could fall into the wrong hands or be used for unanticipated purposes. These concerns are exacerbated when tracking involves, for example, sensitive information about children's health or a consumer's finances. Further, particular concerns have been raised about tracking done by network advertisers across many sites, and most recently, we saw significant consumer concern when one ISP announced and then abandoned plans to track every move of its customers as they navigate online. The FTC has examined behavioral advertising for more than a decade, almost since the Internet transformed into a commercial medium. Our most recent efforts began in November of 2006, when we held 3 days of public hearings on technology issues likely to affect consumers in the next decade. Following these hearings, Commission staff held a series of meetings with stakeholders to learn more about behavioral advertising. And in November 2007, the Commission hosted a town hall devoted exclusively to behavioral advertising. Several key points emerged at the town hall. First, participants confirmed that online behavioral advertising may provide valuable benefits to consumers. Second, the invisibility of the practice to consumers raises privacy concerns, as does the risk that data collected for behavioral advertising could be misused. And third, business and consumer groups alike expressed support for transparency and consumer control in the online marketplace. In December 2007, following the town hall, Commission staff issued and requested comments on proposed principles for online behavioral advertising to spur continuing public dialogue and encourage meaningful self-regulation. In brief, the proposed principles identify 4 issues to consider in developing a self-regulatory scheme. First, companies that collect information for behavioral advertising should provide meaningful disclosures to consumers about the practice, as well as choice about whether their information is collected for this purpose. Second, companies should provide reasonable security for behavioral data so that it does not fall into the wrong hands, and should retain data only as long as necessary to fulfill a legitimate business or law enforcement need. Third, before a company uses behavioral data in a manner that is materially different from promises made when the data was initially collected, it should obtain affirmative express consent from the consumer. Fourth, companies should obtain affirmative express consent before they use sensitive data for behavioral advertising. Commission staff received over 60 thoughtful, constructive, and diverse comments on the principles. The comment period has closed, and we are carefully evaluating the comments that we've received. Included in the comments were a number of specific proposals for how self-regulation could be implemented, as well as reports about steps taken to address privacy concerns since the town hall. Although there clearly is more work to be done, the Commission is cautiously optimistic that the privacy issues raised by online behavioral advertising can be effectively addressed through self-regulation. In such a dynamic and diverse environment, self-regulation may indeed be the best means to develop workable approaches to privacy. The Commission, of course, will continue to monitor the marketplace to keep pace with developments, gain a better understanding of the issues, and take appropriate action to protect consumers as circumstances warrant. Thank you for your attention, and I would, of course, be happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Barnes, thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Jane Horvath, the Senior Privacy Counsel at Google Incorporated. Ms. Horvath.
Thank you. Senator Dorman and Senator Vitter, the most important point I'd like to make this morning is simple. Google makes privacy a priority because our business depends on it. If our users are uncomfortable with how we manage their personal information, they are only one click away from switching to a competitor's services. Putting our users first means that we are deeply committed to their privacy, and succeeding in online advertising and protecting our users' privacy are not mutually exclusive goals. This morning, I will first discuss how online advertising benefits advertisers, website publishers, and Internet users. Second, I'll discuss Google's approach to privacy. And finally, I'll make recommendations for how government and industry can better protect Internet users' privacy. So, let me first touch on the benefits of online advertising. Google's two primary advertising programs, AdWords and AdSense, provide users with highly relevant ads, match advertisers with users who are interested in their products, and provide revenue for website publishers who place our ads on their sites. For example, in Minneapolis, taxi driver Kenny Cormandy built a website for out-of-state travelers called Gopher State Taxi and used Google's AdWords program to compete online with bigger taxi companies. Today, Gopher State Taxi has grown to a network of over 36 cabs, and Mr. Cormandy credits Google with connecting 9 out of 10 of its customers. When someone clicks on one of our ads on a website, Google also shares revenue from that ad with the website owner. Last year, we paid a total of $4.5 billion in ad revenue to website publishers across the United States. Next, let me talk about Google's approach to privacy. As I said earlier, Google makes privacy a priority because our business depends on it. We make sure that 3 design fundamentals are the bedrock of our privacy practices. First, transparency. We have been an industry leader in finding new ways to educate users about privacy, such as through our Google Privacy channel on YouTube, where we feature videos that explain our privacy policies in plain language. Second, choice. We strive to design our products in a way that gives users meaningful choices about what information they provide to us. For example, our Google Talk instant messaging service includes an off-the-record feature that prevents either party from storing the chat. And third, security. We take seriously the protection of data that our users entrust with us. Google employs some of the world's best engineers in software and network security and has teams dedicated to developing information safeguards. Google's advertising products are primarily driven by context rather than behavior. Unlike other companies, we've built our business on showing ads that are relevant to what a user is looking for, not by building detailed profiles based on a user's online behavior. As we continue to incorporate DoubleClick's display ad serving capabilities into our business, Google will continue to be a leader in offering products that respect privacy. Finally, let me turn to our efforts to innovate in the area of privacy protection. Feedback from our users and outside parties, as well as our own internal discussions, has led us to several privacy innovations, including our decision last year to anonymize our server logs after 18 months. In that spirit of innovation today, we offer the following recommendations for both government and the private sector. First, Google supports the passage of a comprehensive federal privacy law. that will establish a uniform framework for privacy and put penalties in place to punish and dissuade bad actors. Second, we support the Federal Trade Commission's efforts to develop principles relating to online privacy and behavioral advertising, and we hope that revised principles will be adopted widely by the online ad industry. And third, we believe that greater labeling of online display ads should be adopted as an industry standard. As I conclude my testimony this morning and welcome the committee's questions, I'd like to show a brief excerpt from one of the videos on our Google Privacy YouTube channel. This video shows a user how to easily remove cookies from their web browsers. Thank you.
What if you don't want websites recording your preferences or ad-serving companies knowing your web browsing history? Well, it's easy to set up your browser to notify you when cookies are sent, to refuse cookies from certain websites or ad-serving companies, or to refuse cookies altogether. Here's how. When you're using Firefox on a PC, just click the Tools drop-down menu at the top of your browser and select the option. When the dialog box opens, click on the Privacy tab. From there, click Show Cookies. When the Cookies dialog box pops up, click Remove Cookies to remove specific cookies, or Remove all cookies to remove them all. Internet Explorer lets you do the same thing.
Thank you.
Ms. Horvath, does that complete your testimony?
Yes, thank you very much.
Ms. Horvath, thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Mr. Robert Dykes, who's the chairman and CEO of Nebuad Incorporated. Mr. Dykes, welcome. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Dorgan and Senator Vitter. My name is Bob Dykes, CEO of Nebuad Inc., a recent entrant into the online advertising industry that partners with internet service providers, otherwise known as ISPs. I come from a security background, serving for many years as Executive Vice President of Symantec Corporation. When we launched Nebuad several years ago, it was at a time when many people had particularly heightened concerns about data security. As part of its mission, Nebuad sought to address these privacy and security concerns. As you will see, Nebuad systems are designed so that no one, not even the government, can determine the identity of our users. Currently, online advertising solutions and data collection methods operate in many locations throughout the internet ecosystem, from users' computers to individual websites to networks of websites. The Nebuad service, in partnership with ISPs, provides consumers with significant benefits, serving them with more relevant ads, which they want, while ensuring that they have robust privacy protections and control over their online experience. Nebuad's ad network also is designed to benefit two groups that provide substantial benefit to the internet. The many smaller websites and general news sites that have difficulty maintaining free access to their content. The ISPs who need to upgrade their infrastructure to provide increased bandwidth for consumers who increasingly want access to internet-delivered videos. Nebuad creates these benefits by using a select set of a user's internet activities to construct anonymous inferences about likely interests, which are then used to select and serve the most relevant advertisements. The Nebuad service is architected and its operations are based on principles essential to strong privacy protection. We provide users with prior, robust notice about the service and opportunity to express informed choice about whether to participate, both before the service takes effect and persistently thereafter. We do not collect or use personally identifiable information, or PII. We do not store raw data linked to identifiable individuals, and we provide state-of-the-art security for the limited amount of information we do store. In other words, allegations by others that we do not provide an opportunity to opt out in our robust notice to users, or that we collect entire web traffic of users, are simply not accurate. To repeat, Nebuad provides robust notice and the opportunity to express informed choice, and there is no collection or use of any personally identifiable information or even a significant portion of users' web traffic, nor any information from password-protected sites, webmail, email, instant messages, or VoIP traffic. We understand that to gain the public's trust, we need to adopt strong privacy protections. Ours have been reviewed by such entities as the Panama Institute, and we are engaging a Big Four audit firm to conduct an audit to verify that we do what we say we do. This committee has long been involved with the creation of privacy statutes covering the cable and telecommunications industries, as well as specific statutes addressing online privacy for children, telemarketing, and spam. Yet even though these and other privacy statutes have been developed one at a time, there are common threads running through them all. Where more sensitive data is collected, and when the collection and disclosure of the data could harm or embarrass a consumer, more rigorous disclosure and consent requirements tend to be imposed. When raw data linked to an identifiable individual is stored for longer periods, there is an emerging trend that more rigorous disclosure, consent, and security requirements should be imposed. NEBOAD supports this privacy paradigm, which provides users with consistent expectations and substantial protections. This paradigm also is technology and business neutral, and it is the basis upon which NEBOAD built its technology and operations. NEBOAD urges the committee to maintain both the paradigm and the principle of technology and business neutrality. Thank you.
Mr. Dykes, thank you very much. We appreciate your being here. Next, we will hear from Ms. Leslie Harris, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Democracy and Technology. Ms. Harris, you may proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Dorgan, members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Ms. Harris, would you pull that microphone much closer and make sure it's turned on? Thank you.
I think it's on. Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to make 3 points and offer several recommendations for the committee. First, while behavioral advertising is growing, consumers are largely uncomfortable with the practice and they're ill-equipped to take meaningful steps to protect their privacy. We do recognize that advertising is an important engine of internet growth and that ad revenue supports a rich diversity of online content. However, massive increases in data processing and storage have allowed advertisers to track, collect, and aggregate information about consumers' web browsing across sites over time and to compile individual profiles. And while each piece of consumer information in a profile may itself not be personally identifiable, the aggregation of this information into rich profiles means it may be more readily tied to a person's identity. All this is happening in an environment where more data is being collected, retained for longer periods of time, often in a form where it can be re-identified. Existing privacy protections are outstripped by technology, and there is a lack of transparency about behavioral advertising practices and an absence of meaningful controls to help consumers make informed decisions about the use of their data. When consumers do find out about behavioral advertising, they're uncomfortable. In a recent study, 59% of the respondents said they weren't comfortable with online companies using their browsing behavior to target advertising to their interests, even when they were told that advertising supports free services. Second, there is an emerging behavioral advertising model that partners ISPs with ad networks, and this does add new legal complexity and additional risks for privacy. While online websites and networks can track what you see on their sites or the sites associated with their networks, an ISP model may, and I do say may, provide access to everything you do online. And that would include non-commercial sites that could reveal political preferences, charitable, religious associations, and the like. Consumers simply don't have an expectation that their web traffic is being intercepted by their ISP and shared with an unknown third party for profiling. And in our view, the law doesn't permit it. We read the Wiretap Act, which prohibits interception and disclosure of electronic communications, including the content of internet traffic, to require unavoidable notice and affirmative express consent for ISP-based behavioral targeting. And many state communications laws require two-party consent, which further complicates the legal landscape. And of course, the Cable Communications Policy Act also prohibits the collection or disclosure of personal information without prior consent. The implementation that we have seen thus far completely fails to acknowledge, let alone comply with these laws. No one has sought consent. Finally, self-regulation is not a full answer. CDT has always been supportive of self-regulation, but the network advertising initiative that was launched 8 years ago has been largely a failure. The model fell short when it was announced. It's failed to evolve over time. And only now, when the FTC has turned its attention to the issues, has the initiative proposed modest improvements. We acknowledge that there are a number of individual companies that have worked hard to educate and improve their users' privacy. We're prepared to continue to work with them and the NAI to continue to improve privacy protection. Self-regulation was never expected to be a full solution. And when the NAI was created, the FTC at that point noted that backstop legislation would still be required to ensure consumers' privacy is protected. We've made a number of recommendations for committee action or written testimony. Let me just briefly highlight a few. First, Senator Dorgan, we agree with you that more hearings are necessary on the ISP question and on other questions like sensitive information secondary use. Second, we really urge this committee to set a goal of enacting general privacy legislation in the next year based on well-established fair information practices. We've been advocating for this for years. We think it's time to act. Third, we do think the FTC should issue its guidelines. We think they need to be enforceable, whether they're under current authority or under targeted legislation. We think the committee should make that clear to the FTC. And finally, we think Congress should encourage the FTC to investigate how technological solutions, including perhaps a do-not-track regime, we were part of a group that proposed that, can give consumers better control over their online information. We do think Congress has a critical role to play in ensuring privacy protection in this increasingly complex online advertising environment, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Ms. Harris, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. Mr. Chris Kelly is the Chief Privacy Officer for Facebook Incorporated. Mr. Kelly, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairman Dorgan and members of the committee, for the opportunity to address the committee about the important privacy matters facing the online advertising industry. I'm Chris Kelly, the Chief Privacy Officer of Facebook, a social service on the Internet that serves more than 80 million active users, about 30 million of whom are in the United States. Facebook aims to create social value by empowering people to share their lives and experiences with the people they care about. From the founding of the company in a dorm room in 2004 until today, Facebook's privacy settings have given users control over who has access to their personal information by allowing them to choose the friends they accept and the networks they join. We're dedicated to developing advertising that is relevant and personal and to transparency with our users about how we use their information in the advertising context. We are pleased to discuss both Facebook's general approach to privacy and how these principles have been implemented in advertising provided by Facebook. With many mainstream media reports focusing on privacy concerns about social networking sites, we first want to clarify how our site differs than most. Though we will not always address user concerns perfectly, no site can, Facebook is committed to empowering users to make their own choices about what information they share and with whom they share it. The statement that opens our privacy policy, a short, plain English introduction, is the best place to start this discussion. It reads, "We built Facebook to make it easy to share information with your friends and people around you. We understand that you may not want everyone in the world to have the information you share on Facebook. That's why we give you control of your information. Our default privacy settings limit the information displayed in your profile to your networks and other reasonable community limitations we tell you about. Facebook follows two core principles. First, you should have control over your personal information. Facebook helps you share information with your friends and people around you. You choose what information you put in your profile, including contact and personal information, pictures, interests, and groups that you join. And you control the users with whom you share that information through the privacy settings on the privacy page. Two, you should have access to the information that others want to share. There's an increasing amount of information available out there, and you may want to know what relates to you, your friends, and people around you. We want to help you easily get that information. Sharing information should be easy, and we want to provide you with the privacy tools necessary to control how and with whom you share that information. If you have any questions or ideas, please send them to privacy@facebook.com, an email address that we regularly monitor. We implement these principles through our friend and network architectures and through controls that are built into every one of our innovative products. Contrary to common public reports, full profile data on Facebook isn't even available to most users on Facebook, let alone all users of the Internet. Users have extensive and precise controls available to choose who sees what among their networks and friends, as well as tools that give them the choice to make a limited set of information available to search engines and other outside entities. The privacy link that appears in the upper right-hand corner of every Facebook page allows users to make these choices whenever they are using the site, and everyday use of the site educates users as to the meaning of privacy controls. For instance, a user will see regularly that they have access to the profiles of their friends and those who share a network with them, but not to profiles of those who are neither friends nor network members. In February 2008, Facebook simplified and streamlined its presentation of privacy settings to users, adopting a common lock icon throughout the site to denote the presence of a user-configurable privacy setting. We also introduced the concept of friends lists, which, when paired with privacy settings, allow users to easily configure subsets of their confirmed friends who may see certain content. We're constantly looking for means to give users more effective control over their information and to improve communications with users and the general public about our privacy architecture so that they can make their own choices about what they want to reveal. I want to say a few words about privacy and advertising on Facebook. It's important to stress in the first instance that targeting of advertising generally benefits users. But we've revealed in our privacy policy for nearly 3 years we've had the following statement present. That Facebook may use information in your profile without identifying you as an individual to third parties. We do this for purposes such as aggregating how many people in a network like a band or a movie and personalizing advertisements and promotions so that we can provide you Facebook. We believe this benefits you. You can know more about the world around you, and where there are advertisements, they're more likely to be interesting to you. For example, if you put a favorite movie in your profile, we might serve you an advertisement highlighting a screening of a similar one in your town. But we don't tell the movie company who you are. This critical distinction that we embrace in our policies and practices and that we want users to understand is between the use of personal information for advertisements in personally identifiable form and the use, dissemination, or sharing of information with advertisers in non-personally identifiable form. Ad targeting that shares or sells personally identifiable information to advertisers without user control is fundamentally different from targeting that only gives advertisers the ability to present their ads based on aggregate data. And with that, I see that my time is up, so I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. We'll now hear from Mr. Clyde Wayne Cruz, Jr., Vice President for Policy, Director of Technology Studies, at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Mr. Cruz, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to appear. Can you hear me? Okay. Online behavioral marketing is not the devil, but with emergent technologies like biometrics on the horizon, data privacy debates like the ones we're facing today are only going to intensify. Targeted advertising helps fuel today's flood of information, frictionless e-commerce, and the global blogger soapbox. It's become cliche to note that the internet is one of the most important wealth-creating and democratizing technologies ever known. But behavioral marketing stokes privacy fears. Is my data personally identifiable? Can it become so? Will my identity be stolen? And if a breach occurs, who's punished? Know that we were all angry when ads were untargeted spam. Now that ads are relevant, well, we're still not satisfied. Behavioral advertising employs heretofore unexploited capabilities of the internet, reinforcing the reality that there's much more to the internet than the web at any one juncture. It's only 2008. User preferences preclude one-size-fits-all privacy policy. Online, some hide behind digital gated communities, others parade in front of personal webcams. Privacy is not a thing to legislate, it's a relationship expressed in countless ways. Legislation would be complex. If online privacy is regulated, what about offline? Should the standard be opt-in or opt-out? Who defines behavioral or sensitive? Should state laws be preempted? What about non-commercial information collection? Industry already follows principles like the FTC's proposed opt-out for sensitive information, even when the information is not personally identifiable. But the rise of the information society amid a homeland security culture is an unfortunate coincidence. Blurring public and private databases complicates things. Programs like Total Information Awareness, CAPS 2, and a national ID undermine privacy when data can't be confined to an agreed-upon business purpose. Government often doesn't need to protect privacy, but to allow it in the first place. One's reminded of the old Snoopy cartoon of Snoopy sitting on top of the doghouse typing, "Dear IRS, please remove my name from your mailing list." And another old joke goes that if McDonald's were giving away free Big Macs, there'd be, in exchange for a DNA sample, there'd be lines around the block. But consumers do care. The net itself enables collective consumer discontent, such as blog backlashes we've seen against companies. The result, firms alter their information handling procedures without law. Consumers can also avoid certain sites or use Anonymizer or Scroogle or TrackMeNot or a virtual private network. Choice mandates aren't persuasive when choice is increasingly the default. This debate's fury implies that real market opportunities exist in providing online anonymity. A marketer doesn't necessarily want to know who you are, but how somebody like you acts. No one in a free market is really lucky enough to self-regulate, as FTC puts it. Firms are regulated by consumer fury, rivals, by Wall Street, by intolerant investors. There's no such thing as no regulation. The choice we face is between political discipline or competitive discipline in an impatient market. Even companies on the frontier of behavioral advertising like Form and Nebuad face discipline. One's sympathies there are going to depend upon the ownership status one accords to a web page. But today's web page is not what tomorrow's web page is going to be, with information and ads coming into the page from numerous sources. Privacy standards best thrive as a war between computer scientists. Marketing to an unidentified customer is today's happy goal. But at the very same time, there's great value in technologies that prevent others from posing as us. That's one reason the use of personally identifiable data shouldn't be ruled out altogether. Meanwhile, we need improved cyber insurance products and enhanced liability products to evolve online. Regulated can short-circuit such market innovations. The private sector needs practice for the really difficult cases like the emergence of biometrics. Future privacy policies are already legally binding. Thus, a more fitting federal agenda would target identity theft and computer crime, enforce privacy policies, and stay neutral on computer science. Keep compulsory databases separate from private ones, stabilize government's own insecure networks, and avoid interventions like data retention that undermine security guarantees. To protect consumers online, we must consciously avoid entrenching regulation such that effective private alternatives and institutions, however warranted, simply cannot emerge. Online marketers are today's battered business bureau, but they need battering by competitive discipline, not just legislation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cruz, thank you very much. And finally, we will hear from Mr. Mike Heinz.
Hinsey.
Mr. Mike Hinsey, I'm sorry. Mike Hinsey is the Associate General Counsel at Microsoft Corporation. Mr. Hinsey, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to testify today about the privacy implications of online advertising. This is a critically important topic that Microsoft takes very seriously, and we applaud the committee for its leadership in this area. Online advertising, as you acknowledged, has become the engine that drives the internet economy. Millions of websites are able to offer content and services for free to consumers because of the revenue they derive from advertising online. In the United States, the amount spent on online advertising already exceeds spending for advertising through radio, magazines, and cable television. It accounted for $21 billion in 2007 and is expected to grow to $50 billion in the next 3 years. Online advertising has been so successful because it is interactive and can be targeted to users' online activities and other characteristics. This targeting benefits users not only because it enables the free services and content they enjoy, but also because they are likely to see more relevant ads. And it benefits advertisers because they can reach users who are more likely to respond to their ads. Each search, click, and other user action online reveals valuable information about the user's likely interests, and online ads can be automatically tailored to those interests. In general, most data collection online happens in conjunction with the display of ads. This means the entity with the greatest market share, and therefore who sells the most ads online, will collect the most data about users. As this committee recognizes, the collection of user data to serve ads on the internet has important privacy implications. Microsoft is here today because we have a deep commitment to consumer privacy. We were one of the first companies to appoint a chief privacy officer, an action we took nearly a decade ago. And we currently have over 40 employees who focus on privacy full-time and another 400 throughout the business who focus on privacy as part of their jobs. We have a robust set of internal privacy policies and standards that guide how we do business and how we design our products and services in a way that protects consumer privacy. With respect to online advertising, we have taken more concrete steps to protect privacy than any of our competitors. Last July, we released Microsoft's privacy principles for live search and online ad targeting. We are committed to these principles, which focus on 3 core themes: transparency, control, and security. Let me explain how we have put each of these principles into action in ways that go beyond others in the industry. The first principle is transparency. We post a clear link to our privacy notice on every page of our websites, including the home page, and we have for several years. We also were one of the first companies to develop a so-called layered privacy notice, which gives concise and easy-to-understand bullet point summaries of our practices with links to more detailed information. And our privacy statement is clear about the data we collect and use for online advertising. The second principle is control. Microsoft enables users to opt out of behavioral ad targeting, but we also give consumers the option to tie their opt-out choice to their Windows Live online account. Unlike methods used by other companies, this means that even if they delete cookies on their machine, when they sign back in, their opt-out selection will persist. It also means that a single choice can apply across multiple computers they use. The third principle is security. For Microsoft, this means not only protecting data from unauthorized access, but also designing our systems and processes in ways that minimize their privacy impact from the outset. We created an anonymized identifier for each of our registered users. Search query data and web surfing behavior used for ad targeting is associated with this anonymized identifier. We also irreversibly and completely remove the IP addresses and other identifiers from search queries after 18 months. We believe that our commitment to these three principles, transparency, control, and choice, and more importantly, the steps we have taken to implement them, make us the industry leader in online privacy. These principles also form the basis for our support for comprehensive baseline privacy legislation, supplemented by robust self-regulation. For example, we have advocated a broader self-regulatory framework than that proposed by the FTC, one that is tailored to account for the type of information collected and how it is used. We have also long supported meaningful privacy legislation, which, as CDT appropriately notes, can protect consumers without hampering business. We view these efforts as part of our multifaceted approach to protecting consumer privacy, which also includes developing technical solutions and educating consumers about how to protect themselves online. In short, at Microsoft, we are prepared to work collaboratively on all these fronts to protect consumer privacy. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Mr. Hinsey, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. To my colleagues, I would say time is not our friend this morning. The vote is supposed to start at 11:15, although I'm told it may slip. We'll probably know shortly. If it starts at 11:30, that means that we would have perhaps until 11:45 before we'd have to depart this room. And if we, I'll do 5-minute rounds here, and if we finish at 11:45, we won't have to come back. If not, we have 5 votes in succession, which means we probably would not be able to come back until 1 o'clock. So my hope would be that for the next 45 minutes to an hour, we'll all be able to have an opportunity to ask relevant questions, and I thank very much the witnesses for being here. I have 100 questions, regrettably, and let me take just 4.5 or 5 minutes and then call on my colleagues. But first of all, online advertising is helpful and useful in my judgment. I understand that. It helps support the Internet itself, which has some wonderful companies and sites providing useful information services, entertainment. I understand all of that. The question today is not, as Mr. Cruz indicated, is certain kinds of advertising the devil. I think advertising is a necessary component of the Internet and is helpful to consumers. The question is about the collection of information about consumers as they travel the Internet. And Mr. Dykes, I'll ask you the first question. The stories that I have seen about maybe an Internet service provider deciding we're going to allow Nebuad to come in, and whenever anybody does anything on our system as someone who has signed up for our Internet service provider service, we're going to essentially shovel all that information over to you as it's being done. I mean, what's the difference between that and tapping into somebody's wire, using the pejorative term wiretapping? Isn't that just wiretapping?
No, sir. We believe that we're not violating the wiretap law. I'm not a lawyer, but my lawyers have told me we're in compliance with the law, and they've prepared a memo on the subject, and I've been prepared to submit that for the record. But it's important to note that the information that we are looking at as people surf the web doesn't involve any personally identifiable information. All we're doing is taking an anonymous identifier. We're taking their IP address, for example, and transforming that into an anonymous number with a one-way hash, and against that anonymous identifier, all we're noting is qualification for market segments. So we're not keeping the raw data, it's just qualification for market segments against an anonymous identifier.
But your approach and the approach of the Internet Service Provider would not be an opt-in approach, it'd be an opt-out approach. I would think if my Internet Service Provider said to me, you know what, Mr. Dorgan, we have a proposition. Is it okay if we give everything you do to another company? I'd say, of course it's not okay. Are you kidding me? The answer is no, capital N-O. I mean, so from an opt-in standpoint, I'm guessing that this would not be a workable model. It only works if you require people to opt out. And I mean, I think that's the difficulty. Ms. Harris, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do. I think, first of all, it's important to understand that our wiretap laws don't care if the information is personally identifiable or not personally identifiable. So they're agnostic on that point. I'm going to call you next. So I just think it's important to understand that. Second, they may not be using all the information, but they are mirroring. They are taking the stream and then somehow mirroring or copying it. So they are providing that information to an unknown third party, a man in the middle. I take Mr. Dyke's word that they are then not using that information, but you have to have a way to separate out the information you're using from the information you're not using. Right. So I don't think you can pretend. Mr.
Dykes, you wish to respond to that?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chairman. So although the information flows through our system, information that doesn't conform to one of the market segments we're looking at is simply ignored and flushed permanently. And so we are only looking at these select innocuous market segments. I'd also point out that we do provide very robust notice to the user and an opportunity to opt out. And these notices are sufficiently robust that people do opt out. So it's not like people are ignoring them. They are informed. And as I said, we're confident that we do not break the law, and we have a memo on the subject that we would submit.
Mr. Kelly, on Facebook, I don't know whether this has changed, but my understanding is that when someone would order an application, which they could on Facebook, called Dogbook or Scrabble, that application then would allow the person selling the application access to all that which exists in Facebook. Was that the case?
So first of all, a user has to affirmatively add an application.
I understand.
Profile, and
but when they do that,
a box that informs them of that they are adding this application and sharing information with the third party. In that case, at that point, the application has the ability to request certain data. We don't hand over all the data. At that point, they have the ability to request it in a session basis and limited to the data that the user who has installed the application can see on Facebook. So the privacy settings persist. That application is allowed to, for caching purposes, retain the information they've requested for only 24 hours. And if they exceed that amount, we have a policy enforcement team which will take action, including potentially shutting down the application. And in the last few weeks, we have shut down a number of applications over violations until they come into compliance.
I've just received some good news. The United States Senate was not constructed to ever be accused of speeding, and all of us who serve here know that, and it actually has exhibited that this morning. We've actually had an 11:45 start time, which means we have a full hour for questions. The 11:45 start time will be the first vote, so that's good news. Let me call on Senator Vitter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some general questions, and I invite very concise responses from anyone who has a response. What is the best estimate available regarding the use of this type of information, not for behavioral advertising, put that on the side, but for other purposes that all of us would consider an abuse, identity theft or other abusive uses, not behavioral advertising? Does anyone have a sense of the size of that problem?
Mr. Vitter, I think that the answer is nobody knows, and there are no rules in place that would prevent any of that. And so the question is, we know, and I will say that for members of the National Advertising Initiative, I keep saying it national, sorry, that they've made a commitment not to do that, but it's a big internet, and we don't know what everybody is doing. But basic fair information practices have you collecting for a purpose, using for that purpose, and not using for another purpose. And we have no legal way of enforcing that.
Anyone else have a sense of the size of that problem?
Well, I would point out that when NeboAd was being founded back in 2006, this is when AOL search data became public, and people could determine that a large amount of raw search data could represent personally identifiable information. We also had the government asking Verizon and AT&T to provide clickstream data, and it was for those reasons that when NeboAd was founded, we resolved never to be in a position to have such data that could ever, if found by others, could ever have a problem. And that's why we don't keep the raw data mapped against a user ID. We only keep this qualification for market segments, and all of our user IDs are anonymized. So we keep very limited data to avoid any of those risks.
Anyone else have a sense of the global size of that problem? Okay. Now, with regard to that problem, again, put behavioral advertising on the side. With regard to that problem, would ensuring that all of this collection of data is made anonymous in the ways that several of you do presumably already solve that problem or not?
I don't think you can do that. I think that, we are trying to believe that this information is anonymous. I think at best it's pseudonymous. We're building profiles, and I think a couple of years ago when AOL released search data for good purpose, for research purposes, it took very little time for people to take a single set of search and identify somebody. So I think that we're moving to a point where there's enough information. Can I interrupt
for a second? Explain that to me as a layperson, because my reaction to that is there are a gazillion people on the internet. How do you possibly take that anonymous information and come up with an individual?
It can't be entirely anonymous, because you're trying to put, even for NeboAd, and we can talk about this, they keep refreshing the information about an individual. You have to, right?
But we only keep it into market segments. The way AOL's data became identifiable is that people did numerous searches on houses in their neighborhood, and fairly soon it was fairly clear who the person was who was doing the search, because there was just so much centered on a particular name and address and things like that.
But profiles can include that. Profiles can include, that you've been on a particular website looking at a particular thing, that you've, searched for your own name, it depends what's in the profile.
If the profiles had that information, that's when it becomes pseudo-anonymous, and therefore you can derive PII.
Well, let me re-ask
having pseudo-anonymous data.
Let me re-ask the question. Could there be a regime ensuring true anonymity in terms of the collection, number one? Is that possible?
I believe so.
And number two, is any legitimate purpose that is of any arguable benefit to consumers sacrificed through that regime?
Well, the effectiveness does decline as you move towards eliminating pseudo-anonymous data, but we've chosen to make that choice. We don't have very sensitive ads. We've chosen not to take very sensitive ads from Big Pharma, for example. So a lot of choices we've made to protect consumer choices that do reduce the economic value, but these, I think, are important choices to gain public.
Anyone else have a reaction to that idea of what most folks would regard as true anonymity? Number one, how possible it is. Number two, what, if anything, would be sacrificed?
I think you're always taking a risk when you think that the Internet, with the kind of network that it is, if pure privacy is what you want, the Internet's probably the wrong network for you, because everybody here has a business card, and the people that we talk about with most of these new technologies, and I talked about warring computer scientists, some are trying to offer anonymity, but on the other hand, there are going to be cases where you don't want somebody to pose as you, and you're going to want to use personally identifiable information. The technologies are going to change as biometrics get integrated into commerce and things like that. So we're not going to want anonymity ultimately in some respects if we're dealing with our insurance company, we're dealing with a finance company.
Well, let me back up. I'm not talking about anonymity dealing with your insurance company. I'm talking about anonymity in terms of the collection of data for the purposes that we're talking about?
I don't think so, because the openness of the internet and the criminal element that's always going to be there. That you can't, anybody can go into Starbucks in the library and get on the net. It's always going to be an open network that nobody has a proprietary stake and can offer that kind of a guarantee. We're going to have activities on the consumer side and institutions like identity theft insurance and all those sorts of things too. We can try our best, and I think that's what scientists are trying to do, but the internet's not the network for privacy in a sense. So.
Thank you.
Senator Stevens was here, and he had to go to an Appropriations Committee markup, and he asked that we put his statement in the record. We will do that by unanimous consent. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Senator Dorgan, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses. I was thinking as I listened, how everyone sort of has a love-hate relationship with advertising on the internet. I love it when it's something for a discount on clothes, and I hate it when my daughter sees the American Girl thing on the screen. And I think everyone feels like that, and I think we also know that advertising plays an important role in enhancing a consumer's online experience, its revenue, and it also promotes the development of online news. So like Senator Dorgan, I would agree that we're not against advertising on the internet. But the issue is, as it becomes more sophisticated, do we have a role here to play in making sure that consumers' privacy is protected as companies develop more technology and are able to dig deeper into that information, that we keep it anonymous. And I guess my first questions are of you, Ms. Parn. They were talking, I know Mr. Kelly and Mr. Hines were talking about how the FTC could go farther in terms of differentiating between the kind of information, that whether it's anonymous information, whether it is, I think they were differentiating between the way you get the information based on personally identifiable information or advertising based on non-personally identifiable information. Could you do that as part of your rules?
Senator, yeah, I think we could make those distinctions. In the first instance, let me just clarify that what the Commission put out were a set of proposed principles that would guide
self-regulation
schemes. So
right, they weren't rules,
not Commission rules. But within the rules, within the principles, I think we reflect, our proposal reflects some differences. For example, the proposal calls for express affirmative consent before an entity can collect sensitive personal information from a consumer for use in behavioral advertising. So we acknowledge that there are some areas that are more sensitive and that require a certain level of heightened transparency and control and choice for consumers. I think that as we're looking at all the comments that we received, that's certainly something that we'll consider, whether we should provide a sliding scale type of scheme.
Well, the other thing is I know you've had 60 comments, and I'm sure a lot of them have been industry groups and privacy groups. But again, as Senator Dorgan was mentioning, I'm not sure individuals out there even understand what's going on. And I was reading about the European Union has this, they have some guidelines where you have to be able to access what people have on you and then correct it if it's false. Have you looked at that at all?
In these sets of principles, we haven't looked at access to the information. I think what we've been more concerned about is the issue of transparency, consumers really understanding what's going on in behavioral advertising. I frankly was surprised that among the over 60 comments we received, we did get some comments from individual consumers, but I think that you're absolutely right. For the most part, consumers don't understand what's happening behind the screen, as it were.
Mr. Hines, you talked about the need for federal law, and I think Ms. Harris talked about updating federal laws. What ideas do you have for changing federal law that we could look at?
Well, going back a couple of years to 2005, we mentioned, there's some very difficult issues there. We have some ideas of what a good federal law might look like. We've also been supportive of state legislation in some cases where it was balanced and provided appropriate guidelines for the online advertising space. We've also been very supportive of security breach notification laws and others. But I think that overall, legislation does play an appropriate part of the mix of protecting consumer privacy, along with self-regulation and consumer education and technology tools.
So the idea would be to take some of the things that Ms. Horvath has been talking about, some of these other things, and actually put them into law. How would it work with the self-regulation?
Well, the federal law would presumably provide a baseline common set of requirements, and then for particular industries, for example, there may be additional, very specific self-regulatory additions that could go on top of that. And I think online advertising is a perfect example of that, where there are some specific aspects of online advertising around behavioral targeting and what consent looks like in those cases that may be more appropriate for self-regulation, but that could certainly build on top of a baseline requirement that's based in law.
Okay. Mr. Kelly, did you want to add, since you raised that issue of the different ways that we could differentiate between information? Are you in favor of some kind of federal law?
We haven't taken a position on a formal federal law around that. We've been focused on creating innovative privacy technology to allow users to control the collection and use of data. And an instructive example here would be that, for instance, in a classic behavioral targeting situation, an ad network would see that you visited 5 auto sites and determine from that you might be interested in buying a give whereas the Facebook approach has been, let's say that if we were, for instance, partnered with an auto site, the auto site would allow you to say, give you a little pop-up that said, do you want to share the fact that you've purchased a Chevy with your Facebook friends, and give you a real-time choice around that. So we're focusing on technology as a solution.
Thank you very much.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you very much. Senator DeMint.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding the hearing. I appreciate your comments on the importance of advertising. I think we all agree that the ability to get all the free things we get on the Internet are important, and they do relate directly to advertising. And I think most of us would agree that the ability of advertisers to target their markets are important to continue to attract advertising revenue to the Internet. And I think we've heard a lot about how the industry has progressed. Just a couple of questions here. Mr. Dykes, just as for instance, so I can kind of get at this anonymous versus not anonymous question, if the Department of Justice were to issue you a subpoena asking you for names of people who have searched for information about explosives, would you be able to provide the names or locations of individuals who had done that?
No, sir, we would not. We would not be able to provide names nor even their IP addresses. We have no personally identifiable information in our system, and it would just simply be not possible to get back to an individual from any information we have in our system. Furthermore, we don't have advertisements and categories on bomb making, for example, and therefore that information isn't even in our system either.
So it appears that the technology has been developed and is being developed and improved that would allow increasing privacy and anonymity on the Internet, which is, I think, impressive given the fact that this is all being done voluntarily. It would be my assumption that the incentives for the businesses represented at the table have a lot of incentives to compete for the best privacy policies, that they would disclose their privacy policies to encourage users to use their particular service because of their ability to protect. I think the private market has a lot of incentives, and let me just direct a few questions at Ms. Parnes. How long do you think the rulemaking or even the development of these principles might take?
Well, I'm reluctant to give a specific time frame, but we are moving quickly on this. As we noted, we received a lot of comments, and this is a challenging issue. We want to drill down, figure out what information we have, if we need additional information, and then move forward. As I said, very quickly.
Do you think at least a year or two, or?
I would doubt that.
Yeah. Well, Do you think it's the responsibility of the FTC to regulate advertising on the Internet?
Well, we certainly, in some ways, we do regulate advertising on the Internet. I mean, the question about behavioral advertising, I think some of our principles are grounded in Section 5. And we do have principles that govern behavioral advertising as well as all other advertising.
It would be my hope that you continue to see your responsibility as protecting consumers and not necessarily attempting to manage or regulate different aspects of our economy. And I think it's, in some ways, we've got a solution in search of a problem as the industry moves very quickly to try to cut these problems off before they occur. It's very likely that if rulemaking or even principle making is going to take a year or two, and obviously the FTC needs to look at it, that the technology that's being talked about today will advance, it will make great strides over the next months and years, and it's very likely that by the time the FTC acts, that the industry will be far ahead of where you are. My concern is this. The government's attempt at privacy certainly is well motivated, but rules, for instance, in the healthcare industry, where when I was with a family member having surgery, that the physician was not able to give me information about actually what took place, or I could not call a doctor's office and get information about my own daughter's bill. And you hear doctors talk about the inefficiencies that are created because of this well-intended policy. I just have great concerns that if the federal government attempts to jump in the middle of a situation where a problem has not yet exhibited itself, that we're likely to inhibit one of the showcases of free enterprise in America today.
Senator, I would just say that is precisely why the Commission is encouraging self-regulation in this area. The principles that we've proposed are principles that would govern a self-regulatory scheme that industry itself adopts, and that we think that self-regulation, at least at this point, is more appropriate in this kind of environment where, as you note, technology is changing so quickly.
Well, that's a good philosophy, and I appreciate hearing it this morning, and I thank all the panelists. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Senator Ben, thank you very much. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank you for holding the hearing. I think this is an issue that's very important. It's being talked about, getting a lot of attention. It's going to get more attention, I think, in the future. And I do believe that it is critical that consumers have knowledge of whom or what is tracking their online activity, and additionally that they have every opportunity to learn more about the uses of their personal information. And in that light, I have a question for Ms. Parnes, and that has to do with sensitive information, which certainly I believe would deserve a greater degree of protection than just regular online uses. What do you consider to be sensitive personal information? Is that a health record, credit card history, those sorts of things? What would you consider?
In our proposal, we identify several examples: medical information, financial information, and any information about children. It is not intended to be an exclusive list, though.
What is the relationship between market share in the search advertising business and the ability to attract advertisers and web publishers? And is there a tipping point where a company, for example, say a Google, could become so dominant in the market that advertisers and web publishers have no choice but to contract with the company?
I'm afraid that I don't think I really have the information. Yeah, I mean, it would be difficult to venture a guess on that. Okay. I mean, perhaps one of the people here might want to.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll let you off the hook, but if anybody else would take a stab at that.
Well,
I don't think you have to worry so much about tipping points in the online world. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but in particular, as long as people have the ability to click, to click that button, and there's no, censorship online. Government doesn't dictate where we go or anything like that. No one can attain that kind of monopoly power because nobody operates in a vacuum. The joke way I put it when debating media ownership is that, even if the biggest companies merge with others across in other avenues, what happens? They could get together and they could get together and try to abuse the trust or what have you. But what happens? Advertisers flee, Wall Street flees, customers flee, the employees flee, the people who work in that business who know the technology and the science move and start another company. So all of the impulses in a market economy, especially in one where barriers to entry are so low, like in internet businesses, there isn't that kind of threat of monopoly power. And Google itself, it wasn't that long ago that all of us were using Yahoo to search or Alta Vista to search, and then Google came along with another technology. It's one algorithm, but you can go on search engine Colossus, I believe. There are hundreds of search engines out there. So, just a thought.
If Congress were to establish regulatory guidelines or core principles for online advertising privacy, what would those principles entail? And how would those align with some of the principles that the FTC is adopting? Anybody want to venture?
Yeah, Mr. Thune, I think it's important to note that the position to have a baseline privacy law is not about advertising. It's a step down. It's for all data collection and use practices. So, those of us who are advocating, I think you're looking at fair information practices. You collect for a particular use, you hold it for the time that use is real. You don't hold things forever. People have a right to know what is in there. Yeah. People are holding on them. They have a right to opt out or opt in, depending on the sensitivity of the data. I think the framework, it's the devil here is in the details, but I don't think that the framework, fair information practices is sort of infused throughout our legal system, and certainly in terms of government information, although somewhat outdated. Let me just add one thing. We do understand and have no interest in slowing down the technological innovation in terms of privacy-enhancing technologies. We do think that is an important part of this, and we wouldn't want to see any law that froze the internet in a way that would make that impossible. So, there is everything's a balance here.
I think that's right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
One comment. We generally agree, and one of the reasons that we came out in favor of comprehensive federal privacy legislation in 2005, which was before we were significantly involved in the online advertising space at all, is that there's just this emerging patchwork of federal and state privacy laws with different standards depending on the industry, depending on the particular issue, and it just made a lot of sense to harmonize that, both from a compliance standpoint, from a company's point of view, and from a consumer standpoint, so that they can know that they have a common baseline protection across the board, regardless of the kind of industry that they're dealing with. And as we get into online advertising, that kind of baseline federal privacy standard could certainly help here. It doesn't answer all the questions, and that's why we need to supplement it with self-regulation and other practices. But I think the need for a federal law is not specific to online advertising, but is more general. And I'd just like to make one other point about your other question earlier about the competition and dominance in this space. And I think for the purposes of this hearing, we definitely see a nexus between competition and privacy, in that if there does become a dominant player in the online advertising space, that means that there is a single company that is collecting more data. The more ads you serve, the more data you're collecting. And it could become the case where a single company has a nearly complete picture of people's online advertising or online behavior. Beyond that, we also think that the need for competition in the space fosters competition and privacy. If there's a dominant player, there's little or no incentive to adopt better privacy practices because they're not facing competitive pressure from other companies that may be adopting superior privacy practices as well.
And Senator, I'd like to agree with both of the prior speakers. I think the law should be focused on privacy and what levels of information are being collected, and they should be technology neutral and business process neutral, and not necessarily advertising focused either. It should really be focused on privacy. But I also think that the government needs to be very careful in rulemaking to ensure that it doesn't stifle competition for the very reasons we just noted, because it's new competitors springing up all the time when we think we have one dominant competitor, and past history has shown that there's other ones in the wings springing to life, and we wouldn't want the government to stifle that. So there is a role here for self-regulation as well, to allow for flexibility as technology develops.
Can I just make one brief point on this notion of technology neutrality in the law? We do have neutrality under ECPA. If you're acting as a conduit, you're treated one way. If you're not, you're treated the other. And I think we have to be careful. We have wiretap laws. We have other laws that apply to the to the institutions that stand between you and the ends of the network. And I think we can sort of use this neutrality, everybody should be treated the same at all times, as a mantra, and lose, I think, track of the fact that people stand in different positions to a consumer, and we have to take that into account.
Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Thune, thank you. Senator Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, I think the timing of this hearing is uncanny because we have on the floor right now the FISA bill, which the whole question in FISA is about the protection of the rights of privacy and the civil liberty of Americans. I can tell you all that as a member of the Intelligence Committee, we have been struggling with this FISA issue for the last year and a half. And we have come up with a compromise in a resolution of how you can allow our intelligence agencies to seek the information of terrorists, but at the same time protect the civil liberties of American persons, which is defined as an American citizen and a person not an American citizen who is legally within the United States. What I'm struck with is that we have a similar issue here. And take, for example, I use the internet to go online to read the newspapers back home in Florida. Now, if suddenly the kinds of articles that I'm reading are going to be determined, the content of what I'm reading is going to be identified with me so someone can target advertising, I want to question the underlying basis of this. In our discussion of snooping of terrorists before, we have carved out an exception that we don't want the government. Now, here we're talking about the private sector, but we don't want the government sector to go and examine what books that we're reading at the local libraries. Well, right here we have the question of whether or not we're going to let other private people within the private sector examine the same thing and then use it for a commercial advantage. Now, I'm not naive enough to not to understand that this is already happening, and so the question is, how do we rein this in so that as this internet continues to explode into something years down the road that we can't even conceive now, that will be totally ubiquitous, how do we support our Constitution and protect our civil rights? So let me just ask, is there a way that we can approach this where we would govern the type of internet connection used instead of the content or the information collected. What do you think about that, Ms. Harris?
Well, I think I'm not entirely sure of what you're suggesting, Senator.
Nor am I.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, you know, I'm not sure that that's really the answer. I will say this, that you are, I think, very prescient to connect, you know, what appears to be a totally unrelated matter, FISA, with what's going on here. And the reason is that when we operate in an internet regime where we have no limits on how long you can collect data, where we have these other sets of laws that, you know, Electronic Communications Privacy Act, et cetera, that are 20 years old and did not anticipate that whatever we're building here and whatever is being collected, to the extent that it can be pseudonymously connected through user logs, et cetera, it's also available to the government. So I don't think we can view these things as there's a consumer stream that's being collected out here and there's a government stream. If you look at email, for example, we have very little protection in this country for stored email because we didn't anticipate 20 years ago that it was going to be stored online. That information has very little legal protection. And so we're in a perfect storm.
Yes,
between the
we are.
Commercial activity.
Yeah, just like, you know, we hold it very dear in this country that we don't like other private citizens reading our personal mail. But in effect, what we have is the ability to read our personal communications here by other private individuals, separating the issue from Big Brother in the government.
I don't think you can.
Well, let me ask you this, Ms. Harris.
That's not to suggest that they're acting as agents for the government. I want to be really clear here. It's just that the laws we have, once we collect this data.
But they could act.
Well,
that information could. But I want to get off on that tangent. Let me ask you this, Ms. Harris. Do you believe consumers are entitled to an opt-in arrangement rather than the opt-out?
I think it depends on the data. And I think it depends on the context. You know,
give me an example.
Well, I think that we think that when you're operating in an environment where you are the ISP and you're standing between the ends of the network, that we already have law, the Electronic Communications Privacy Law, Cable Act, and a myriad of state laws that require an opt-in. That the ISP stands as sort of the center of internet chain of trust between the two ends. And so online in the advertising context, if we could figure out a robust way to do opt-in. But then where we have difficulty is PII and non-PII, the personal information, are starting to merge. It's much harder to separate them. We have profiles of what seemingly each piece looks like, an innocuous piece of information, and they're tied to some kind of ID so they can be refreshed. And that ID can be tied to your internet address. It's a very complicated area. That's why I'm really pleased to hear Senator Dorgan talk about more hearings. I think we have to get a baseline bill, but we're going to have to do a lot of work to go through these issues.
I want to commend Senator Dorgan for doing this, and this is the beginning of a long road as we try to grapple with this issue. May I ask one more question?
Yes, your time has expired, but we'll recognize you for one more question. We're going to have a second round because we have until 11:45, so you may proceed.
Right now, we've got the Commission doing this self-regulatory principle, and it deals with the internal information security, but it may not address the security of these third parties. I wanted to ask you, Ms. Parnes, has the Commission studied the types of data security or encryption associated with these activities?
The Commission hasn't specifically studied whether all of this information that's being collected is encrypted, but one of the principles that we've announced calls for data security so that the information that's collected is held in a secure way. And we have also called for information to be held only as long as it's needed for some legitimate business or law enforcement purpose. We don't focus particularly on encryption or any other type of technology in looking at data security. It's reasonable security measures in light of the nature of the information that's held.
Thank you. Senator Nelson, thank you very much. Let me make a couple of comments and ask some additional questions. To give you an example of, as a consumer, things that I think are beneficial in terms of online collection of information, I go to, maybe I shouldn't use the site name, Amazon as an example, and are searching for a book or a couple books. And Amazon comes back to me and says, here's what you searched for previously. So all of a sudden I know they've kept information about me, correct? And then they also come back and they say, and by the way, here are other books that people are looking at when they look at the book. So they're obviously collecting information about what other people have done. Very beneficial and very interesting to me to take a look at that. I don't walk away from that computer thinking, you know, that's a real serious problem. I think that's an advantage. But then there are other questions. For example, Ms. Horvath, Google. I use Google as a verb because I just Google it. I'm always Googling something, right? And so is Senator DeMint, I'll bet. And I also use MSN. So the two of you, Google and MSN, likely have information about where I've been traveling, right? And you may be, I didn't do this, but so I go to, well, I may not Google this, but I may. I decide I'm going to get to WebMD somehow or another, and I'm going to take a look at gout, dementia, and postnasal drip, right? Now, I don't want the whole room to know that. Not that I would go do that, but that may apply to some others, but I disavow it. But my point is, I do that, and then I say, I want to find a flight to San Francisco. I want to go to the St. Francis Hotel, and then I want to go to a Flying Others Brothers concert. And so I'm doing all that. So now both of you perhaps know all of that about me. Or maybe that was all Senator DeMint that did that. And so let me ask you a question. Do you know that about me?
Actually, we don't. It would really depend on how you're using our service.
Well, let's say I use it so that you know it.
If you're a signed on account holder, if you are signed in, then we would know what you're searching for. But we know what you're doing only on the Google.com site. Once you leave the Google.com site, the connection is gone.
If I'm on MSN and pull up Google on MSN and use Google to go find something, you're saying you don't keep a record of that?
We would know what your search query was.
Right.
If you came onto our service to Google.com and you weren't logged in, what we would collect would be your IP address,
right,
the operating system that you're using,
correct,
the browser type that you're using, the query that you have requested. And we would, if you don't have a cookie already, we'd have a cookie.
That was my point.
That's all we would collect.
Well, that's a lot.
If you went out to the
You know about postnasal drip then, right?
No, because
you don't know that's where I went?
But if you were searching on Google for postnasal drip, we would know that you were searching for that. But once you went off to WebMD, we would not know that you were searching for gout.
So how long do you keep the postnasal drip inquiry?
Well, it's only connected to your IP address. And as there is an argument as to whether IP addresses are personally identifiable information because of the non-static nature. It doesn't. When you're assigned an IP address, it doesn't mean that you're going to have it 3 days from now, the same IP address. So it would be stored in our logs iteratively. So it wouldn't be saying Senator Dorgan was looking for postnasal drip in our logs. No, we would not know that about.
I'm using a silly example, obviously, but if I'm on MSN as an example, and I'm moving around, and then I go to Google and type in dementia, and MSN has a record of what I'm doing, I assume, and you have a record of what I'm doing at Google. My question is, how long do you keep those records?
We store our search logs for 18 months, and after 18 months, we anonymize them by deleting what would be your cookie ID and also by redacting the IP address, so it could no longer be connected to a computer that you used.
And how long do you store this information?
Ours is 18 months as well, and our anonymization process goes a little bit further. We delete the entirety of the IP address and all cookie IDs.
And if you're a Gmail user and log in, then what?
Then it's the logs are exactly the same. It's 18 months, and then it's deleted after that.
And if Mr. Dykes comes to you at Google, or MSN someday and says, I want to contract with you all, or goes to Verizon or whomever, a service provider or a company, online company, and says, I'd like to contract. I'd like to get everything that you've got, just stream it over to me, because he's an advertising agency and he's going to frame up advertising in the future that'll have beneficial content for somebody. Your reaction to that? He says, I can actually pay you some pretty big money if you just stream all your stuff to me at the same time you're collecting it.
It's a hypothetical. We would obviously look at all the privacy implications of any deal we would do. Currently, we are not sharing that data with anybody. It's all used for our own internal operations. And as far as I'm aware, that's our plan going forward.
Ms. Harris, yes, Mr. Dykes.
Could I point out that if we were involved in that type of transaction, we wouldn't be storing the sensitive medical information that you just cited, and we wouldn't have the IP address because we do a one-way hash on that. So we would just keep it against an anonymous identifier, the innocuous commercial categories that occurred there.
I understand. Ms. Harris, Senator DeMint, my colleague, indicated that, and I think Mr. Cruz also, that this is probably a solution in search of a problem, this discussion about, and Mr. Cruz's point, I think, is that if somebody's doing something you don't like, you're going to go someplace else. If you back all the way up from that, that's like you don't need FDA and inspecting food plants, because if somebody's producing food that makes you sick, they'll be out of business soon. But I mean, some make that point that are really against all regulation. But is this a solution in search of a problem?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, you would have to have a level of transparency, and believe me, we encourage every day our colleagues at this table and some who are not in industry to compete with each other on privacy. But I don't think consumers, understand at a level of granularity about the differences in policies. And I can say, they're still all keeping information for too long. We still have information tied to IP logs. I mean, this question about everything being anonymous, everything is not anonymous. At a minimum, we've got pseudonymous logs. We've got one-way hashes. Those identifiers can be linked back by somebody to the IP address because we're updating the profiles. So, it's just not that simple.
One further point, and then I'll call on my colleague.
There just to say that clearly represents a misunderstanding of how we operate, and I'd take time to talk to Ms. Harrison.
If we have time, we'll come to that at the end. One final point. This committee did, on behalf of consumers, a do not call list, obviously having to do with telephone solicitation. I'm assuming that there are technical difficulties with the do not track list, and I've just described when I started my questioning why tracking with respect to my search for a book on a site really is probably beneficial to me, but I don't know what's being tracked of Senator DeMint or Senator Carper's activities on the web. I don't have the foggiest idea who's tracking it, how they're tracking it, how they might use it, whether that company has some scruples and might be very careful about how it handles, or whether it's somebody else that grabs a hold of it and says, you know what, Katie barred the door, I'll sell it to anybody. So that's the only question in my mind, that there are so many unanswered questions about information, how people navigate this web, that the purpose of hearings, of course, is to try to inform and to understand, and that's the purpose of this hearing. Let me call on Senator Carper, who has not yet had an opportunity, and then I'll call on Senator DeMint.
I apologize for missing your presentations and the questioning. As you know, we have a number of committees, subcommittees we serve on, and I've been detained in another hearing trying to figure out how to save Medicare trust funds a couple $100 million before it goes defunct. Sometimes when I vote, and we're going to start voting, I think in about 10 minutes. Let me just use this as an opportunity to ask each of our witnesses to give me maybe a minute apiece, a takeaway. If we can't remember everything you say, wouldn't pretend to, but each of you give us a takeaway. What you think when we leave here? What would you have us keep in mind? And Ms. Harris, why don't we start with you, and we'll just go to Mr. Kelly and Mr. Cruz.
I mean, I think the key takeaway is that we are in a very robust online environment where we get great benefit from the advertising, but we are collecting more and more information about consumers at the time that the information that consumers are putting online is increasingly personal and sensitive: health data, location data. Self-regulation is a piece, but self-regulation alone is not enough to protect privacy, and we need to have some baseline rules in place. We have hearings, and we bring in the companies who are good actors, who are at least willing to talk to privacy groups. It's a very big internet, and we have to have some baseline for everybody.
And who should provide the baseline guidance? Should the industry police itself?
Well, I'm saying self-regulation plays a key. It forces the boats up, but it is not in and of itself a solution. And we think that Congress has to pass a baseline privacy law, and we've been advocating for years for that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kelly?
So Facebook has been focused on transparency in the collection of information about